It had to happen eventually. After almost 4 years of a war in which Russia's main tactic on the ground has been to throw soldier after soldier at Ukraine's defenses, manpower is becoming a problem. There is only so much death that a nation can endure before it damages its own ability to wage the war that it started, and Russia finds itself at the tipping point. Too many of its people have died in Ukraine, and now Russia's mortality rate is unsustainable. What was already the biggest crisis that Russia faces has just gotten a whole lot worse, and the country now has to deal with a prospective future in which it doesn't have enough people for its military or for Russia itself. For Russia, the Ukraine war has become a death machine, and its mortality rates are soaring to levels never seen before. Al Jazeera reported on this problem in a January 8th article in which it shared comments made by both Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky and the Commander-in-Chief of Ukraine's armed forces, Oleksandr Syrskyi. Both have noted that the last 3 months of 2025 saw Russia lose increasing numbers of soldiers, suggesting that an already very effective Ukrainian defense is now causing losses so catastrophic that Russia can no longer handle them. Zelensky's comments reveal that Russia's death rate has been rising by about 5,000 soldiers per month since October 2025. In December, 35,000 occupiers were eliminated, and this has been confirmed with video footage, Zelensky claimed in his January 5th evening address. In November, there were 30,000, and in October, 26,000 eliminated occupiers, Zelensky added. It's worth pointing out that these numbers relate to Russian deaths, not Russian casualties. For context, UKR Inform reported in January 2025 that December 2024 was most likely the costliest month of the war for Russia up to that point. The month saw Russia suffer 48,670 casualties, but that figure includes the war wounded. Deaths would have been much lower than those seen in the same month a year on. And that's the big difference that is having a massive impact on Russia. Its soldiers are increasingly being killed instead of wounded. That means they can no longer cycle back onto the battlefield once they recover, and in the longer term, more deaths mean fewer people coming back to Russia when the war is over. The latter problem will compound any issue that already exists, which we'll explain later in the video. Syrskyi offered a similar analysis in a social media post, though his December 2025 number was a little lower than Zelensky's. The enemy lost over 33,000 personnel in December. This figure includes only confirmed video cases, but the actual losses of the occupiers are greater, Syrskyi claimed. However, he added something that will be extremely worrying for Russia. According to Syrskyi, December 2025 was the first month when the unmanned systems units of the Ukrainian Defense Forces neutralized approximately as many servicemen of the occupying army as Russia conscripted in a month. What does this mean? Well, Russia has now reached the point where its forces in Ukraine are going to actively start dwindling. At least that will be the case if Ukraine maintains the levels of death-dealing success that it saw in December 2025. The numbers are now unsustainable, as Russia can no longer cycle in more troops than it's losing each month into Ukraine. The numbers back the statement up, at least if you believe the head of Ukraine's military intelligence, or HUR, Kirilo Budanov. Al Jazeera reports him as stating that Russia's average monthly recruitment was 33,583 in 2025, and that Russia's goal is to increase that average to 34,083 in 2026. Neither number is enough to sustain the 35,000 Russian deaths that Zelensky claims Ukraine is now inflicting on Russia's forces, and that creates an untenable situation for Putin. As for why this is happening, part of the reason likely has something to do with Putin's blind determination to capture the Donetsk-based city of Pokrovsk, along with several other key settlements in Ukraine. In Pokrovsk alone, Russia has amassed up to 156,000 soldiers, Al Jazeera said on December 11th. When more soldiers are attacking a city, a higher death rate is expected, especially when those soldiers are being ordered to constantly charge defenses that are cutting them down in waves. However, that's far from the main reason that more Russian soldiers are dying than ever before. The biggest contributor to the insane figures that Zelensky and Syrskyi have shared is the drones that Ukraine is manufacturing in even higher numbers. Zelensky hints at this both in the comment we've already shared and in another statement that Al Jazeera reported on December 19th. Putin spends around 30,000 soldiers' lives on the front every month. Not wounded, 30,000 killed each month. We have drone footage confirming these deaths, Zelensky said. The implication is that this drone footage is being captured by first-person view or FPV drones, as they record what their operators see as these drones score direct hits on Russian combatants. Indeed, Ukraine is actively encouraging its drone operators to score as many kills with their drones as possible via a gamified system that allows them to earn points for each kill they get. The Guardian reported on this initiative in November, noting that it had launched over a year before, and that the soldiers who sign up earn points that they can trade on Ukraine's Brave One marketplace for more drones and autonomous vehicles. In August, 95 drone units were taking part in this marketplace system, The Guardian says. By November, the number had risen to 400 units. As brutal as it may sound, turning the death dealt by drones into a gain seems to have had an enormous impact on the kill figures that Ukraine is now reporting. Beyond incentivizing drone kills, Ukraine is also producing more drones than ever before, and it has the capacity to build even more than it already has. Politico noted in an August 2025 article that 2024 had seen both Russia and Ukraine reach the point where they could each build a staggering 1.5 million FPV drones per year. Both nations called for a massive ramp-up in FPV drone production for 2025, and Ukraine at least succeeded. Retired US General David Petraeus pointed this out, noting that the only thing holding Ukraine back from utterly flooding the front lines with more FPV drones than it already has was money. The drones here are not just cutting edge, they are bleeding edge, Petraeus claimed during the May Kyiv Security Forum. With more money, Ukraine can produce 4 to 5 million drones this year. It's unclear if Ukraine hit that ambitious target in 2025, though it will have a much better chance of hitting it in 2026. That's because European Union leaders have agreed to deliver a huge $105 billion loan to Ukraine, with the money being generated by EU borrowing to relieve the financial challenges that became increasingly apparent for Ukraine in 2025. With those challenges alleviated, Ukraine will have the opportunity to invest more heavily into drone production, ultimately meaning that this massive kill figures reported for the last 3 months of 2025 may just be a starting point rather than a peak. Ukraine has also been preparing to ramp up production through its drone approval process. On January 5th, RBC Ukraine reported that Ukraine's Ministry of Defense approved over 1,300 new models of Ukrainian-made weapons, with more than 550 of those approvals being for unmanned aerial vehicles. What this means is that Ukraine is both building more drones in terms of pure numbers and also developing more types of drones, each offering its own innovations that can be utilized on the battlefield. United 24 Media also published an interesting article covering the success of Ukraine's drones during the latter half of 2025. That article shows a similar increase in drone kills as those reported by Zelensky and Syrskyi. In July, Ukraine scored 16,262 drone hits. That number had more than doubled to 33,019 by December. The last 3 months of 2025 alone saw Ukraine hit up to 100,000 Russian troops with drones, the outlet says. And Ukraine plans to deliver even higher numbers than that for 2026. If Ukraine is successful, its drones will be doing enough to not only maintain the already unsustainable levels of losses that the Russian military faces, but will build on those losses. Russia's response to all of this has been pretty typical: ignore, deflect, and boast. Al Jazeera reports on claims made by the Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, that November saw Russia start to provide forward reserve units in the border region of Belgorod, with heavy equipment including all-terrain vehicles, howitzers, and thermobaric weapons. That's not as impressive a feat as it sounds, as the ISW explains. Reserve territorial defense units assigned with protecting rear area critical infrastructure do not require such heavy equipment suited for offensive operations. Russia is setting conditions to deploy Belgorod Oblast active reservists for combat missions. In other words, reservists who weren't meant to enter Ukraine, at least not anytime soon, are now being prepared to be pushed to the front lines. That's likely because Russia needs those troops to replace those that it's losing at record rates. Ukraine will likely be monitoring this situation closely, as reservists leaving Belgorod will create opportunities for future strikes and perhaps even a counter-invasion similar to the one conducted against Kursk in August 2024. After all, a poorly protected border region is a pretty attractive target. So Russia is now struggling to replace the soldiers that it's losing with new recruits. However, its manpower problems go even deeper than that. In a January 8th article, Euromaidan Press says that Russia is left with an extremely difficult choice. Either it works on rebuilding its battlefield losses, allowing it to maintain its level of offense in Ukraine, or it accepts that it's losing more soldiers than it's recruiting and instead focuses on building the strategic reserves that it wants to build. It has to be one or the other because of Ukraine's massive kill rates, and it seems more likely that Putin's desired reserves are going to feel the brunt of the manpower challenges that Russia now faces. In fact, they already are. At the beginning of 2025, Russia had grand plans to create a large number of new divisions and brigades, presumably because it believed its losses in Ukraine would be sustainable enough to allow it to do so. As has so often been the case during the supposed special military operation, Russia massively underestimated Ukraine's capabilities, along with the ability of its soldiers to both maintain and build upon the massive casualty rate that Russia experienced in 2024. Euromaidan Press says that Ukrainian military observer Konstantin Mashevets explained the impact Russia's losses had on its desire to create new units. Of the 17 maneuver divisions and up to 9 brigades that Russia planned to create in 2025, it was only able to create 4. That's not 4 of each, that's 4 of the intended 26 divisions and brigades in total. And those that it did create ended up being far weaker than they should have been. The new formations include the 68th and 71st Motorized Rifle Divisions under the Leningrad Military District and 2 Naval Infantry Divisions, converted from the 155th and 336th units of the Pacific and Baltic fleets respectively, Euromaidan Press says before adding, according to Mashevets, these units are likely not manned to their doctrinal levels and appear structurally weakened. Missing from these divisions are artillery, air defenses, logistical components, and heavy armor. Russia is instead equipping its soldiers with light vehicles, Euromaidan Press reports Mashevets as claiming. This has an impact on the battlefield. With scant armor, the infantry-heavy assaults that Russia is conducting against Ukraine's defenses are more easily cut down by drones, likely resulting in the scale of death that Zelensky and Syrskyi report. Russia is in dire need of a surplus to create the divisions it wants to create, and that surplus simply isn't coming. Mashevets says that Russia will need an additional 70,000 troops to create the 17 divisions that it intended to make in 2025. The brigades will require even more. That would already be a tall order earlier in the Ukraine war. Now that Russia is losing as many or more soldiers than it's recruiting, it seems almost impossible that Russia will be able to get anywhere close to building a solid strategic reserve. We already see that in the Belgorod situation mentioned earlier, as reservists are being prepared to fight on the front lines. Of course, Russia could just start recruiting more soldiers, except that's becoming a lot harder for Russia to do too. On October 22nd, the New Voice of Ukraine reported on a claim by Ukraine's HUR that Russia was starting to struggle to recruit new soldiers from some of its selection points. For instance, the points in Yakutia had only managed to recruit an average of 40% of the soldiers the Kremlin told them to recruit. Similar shortfalls were seen in Russia's Far East region, with the New Voice of Ukraine saying that a combination of the scale of death on the battlefield and the low pay on offer were contributors. The last point may seem strange, given that there are plenty of reports of Russia offering its soldiers exorbitant amounts of money, both as annual salaries and in sign-up fees to join its military. However, there are indications that the Russian cash pot is running low. 5 days after the New Voice of Ukraine's report, Radio Free Europe Radio Liberty noted that several of Russia's regions had drastically reduced the signing bonuses that they're offering to prospective soldiers. Tatarstan and Samara are among those regions, with both seeing payments drop from millions of rubles to the federally mandated minimum of 400,000 rubles. In Samara, the sign-up bonus was as high as 3.6 million rubles in January 2025, but it had dropped to 400,000 by October. For context, that amounts to a decline from around $44,700 to about $5,000 in around 10 months. Money was a major motivator for those who signed up to Russia's military early in the war. Without it, Russia is having a much harder time recruiting soldiers to replace those it's losing in droves in Ukraine. The situation has become so desperate for Russia that it's resorting to dirty tactics to get foreign contract soldiers to sign up for the fight that Putin started. That's according to a November 25th CNN report, which reported on comments made by Kenyan President William Ruto. He expressed concerns over young Kenyans who have been illegally recruited to fight in the war, CNN reports. The same outlet also said that South Africa was investigating reports that 17 of its people had ended up fighting in Ukraine, which South African authorities only learned about when the soldiers sent distress calls in which they asked for help to return home. Russia has been using coercion, deception, and sometimes outright bribery to get its hands on those foreign fighters. Russian visas, residence permits, and the promise of Russian citizenship, or the threat of those being stripped away, have become key tools for Russia as it tries to recruit more fighters, CNN reports. The Kremlin's approach appears to be make these desirable items available, knowing that those who take the bait will end up in Ukraine, where they'll likely die or be captured. So Russia has two issues impacting it on the Ukrainian battlefield. It's now losing so many soldiers that its existing recruitment levels aren't providing enough replacements to sustain its losses. And recruitment is getting harder, in part because money has run out, leading Russia to resort to desperate tactics to lure foreign fighters onto the field. Those tactics may not hold up for long, and they don't appear to offer anywhere near the number of soldiers that Russia needs to replace its killed troops, never mind build the reserves that the Kremlin wants. And it gets worse. Russia's manpower issues are becoming a strategic liability in Russia itself, as well as in Ukraine. That's the point that Paul Goebel, who's a senior fellow at the Jamestown Foundation, made during a January 7th interview with TVP World. Demographic pressures are now intersecting directly with the Ukraine war effort, Goebel argues, meaning that Russia has to try to pull out as much as it can from the existing population. The word existing is key here, as it's not just soldiers that Russia is struggling to replace, It's people in general, as fertility rates have fallen to about 1 child per woman in many of Russia's major cities, TVP World says. That birth rate isn't high enough to sustain Russia's current population, never mind replace the casualties caused by the Ukraine war, which the Ukrainian Ministry of Finance says stands at 1.2159 million and counting. Russia's collapsing birth rate has been a problem for a long time. In April 2025, the Moscow Times said that the country's birth rate had declined to a 200-year low, and that drops of between 18 and 27% have been recorded in some areas during January and February of 2025. In December, IntelliNews reported that Russia's overall birth rate stood at 1.4 children per woman, and that Putin used his annual year-end press conference to call for measures that could increase that rate to 2 children per woman. Ending a brutal war that's killing tens of thousands of Russians per month, making the very idea of having children untenable for many, would be a good start. But that particular measure doesn't seem to have crossed Putin's mind. Interestingly, birth rates in Russia are higher in rural and non-Russian regions of the country, Gobel tells TVP World. That creates an entirely different problem for Putin, as it means that Russia is going through a demographic shift in which native Russians are slowly being replaced by people who aren't native to the country. Gobel says that Russia's population losses could exceed 1 million people annually in the decades to come, adding that this should come as no surprise to any logical thinker. It's very difficult to ask people to have 5 or 6 children if they live in a one-bedroom apartment, Gobel says when pointing out that Russia has housing shortages and stagnant living conditions that compound the uncertainty caused by the long war in Ukraine. Perhaps this means that the Russian manpower problems that we're seeing in the country's military are a portent of things to come. There are certainly parallels. So many native Russians have died in Putin's war that it's getting hard for the Kremlin to find more, resulting in its recruiters relying more heavily on foreign soldiers. Similarly, birth rates among native Russians are so low that it seems only non-natives are coming anywhere close to replacing the shortfall caused by declining rates. None of these problems seem fixable as long as Putin continues the brutal war that has cost his country so much already. Will that be enough to convince Putin to stop? It seems unlikely. Putin instead seems to care little about the impact of his war on his own people, perhaps because he thinks that a Russian conquest of Ukraine will be the defining aspect of his legacy long after he's gone. For its part, Ukraine knows how much the Russian people are struggling and it's piling on the pressure. A rip-roaring start to the year has seen Ukraine carry out a constant stream of long-range drone strikes against Russian military and oil targets. Find out more about those strikes in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more examinations into Russia's growing manpower and population challenges. And thank you as always for watching.